And right there in front of hundreds of other church leaders, she stood up, she grabbed the microphone and said to me, to everyone, that nobody reads email anymore. And it was a little awkward since I was there to present on the importance of using email. But I know that what she really meant was that nobody reads her email anymore. Hey there, it's Matthew Warner, and this is the Finding Uno Show. Welcome to the Finding Uno Show. Who's Uno? Oh, you know Uno. He's that one lost sheep the shepherd leaves the 99 to go after, and we are here to help you find him. I'm your host, Matthew Warner, founder of Flocknote.com, and I am joined by my co-host, Matthew Sewell. What's going on, Matt?
Hey, not a whole lot.
It's great to have you here. So we are kicking this whole project off. This is our first episode of the Finding Uno Show, talking about email. And here's a few reasons why. So we're going to cover a lot of topics in this show: evangelization, communication, leadership, talking about revitalizing your church community and helping you become the leader you're supposed to be at your church. But email is number one. That's been, along with texting, our expertise here at Flocknote for over a decade. So we have over a decade of experience working with thousands of churches on improving how they're sending their email and improving the way they communicate using that channel and others. Second, we know that thousands of you already listening to the Finding Uno Show right from the beginning here are already using email all the time in your church communications, and it's one of the most important communication channels that you use. And finally, because not only do people still read email, but we are reading more email than ever before. And I wanted to start off with a few stats. When I looked these up, they're really shocking. So in the world, we send 293 billion emails each day. So each day in the whole world, we send 293 billion with a B emails, and about 34% of those get open on average. So that means that we open and read about 100 billion emails each day. Those are the ones that get opened and read, 100 billion. And so there's 7.5 billion people in the world, and somehow we're reading 100 billion every day. And of course, all 7.5 billion don't use email a lot yet. But that's kind of the next point, is that it's continuing to increase. So as more people are starting to use email, and those of us who use it rely on it more and more, these numbers are just going up. So there's an article last year in the Wall Street Journal that called email the, quote, hot new channel for reaching real people. And so the idea here was that after all these other channels and tools, and in this age of media and all these ways you can communicate, that still 2019, this was when they wrote it last year, email was the hot new channel for reaching real people. And so it was decided that people are coming back to realizing that email is not only still important, still relevant, but it is potentially the most important and effective channel that you have. And when we set out with this whole experiment and project, creating Flocknote to improve communications and connectivity at churches, that was one of the first steps. It was like, well, what are the channels we should be using? What are the ones that get real results? And we started out experimenting with lots of different things. And we realized that as you got into the practical matters of church leaders that were doing meaningful work, email was still the most practical and most effective. And of course, then over the next decade, texting surged through there as well as a really effective channel in some other ways. And we'll talk about that on some other shows, but we're focusing on email today. And what we just learned through all of that is that if you're doing meaningful work and you know how to communicate it well, that email works wonders. And so one of our purposes here at the Finding Uno Show is to help you communicate the meaningful work that you're doing and do it really well, so that you're effective at whatever tools you use. But then when you choose the right one, it's even that much better. And email is certainly one of those channels.
Yeah. So hopefully the stats speak for themselves, right? But there'll always still be the people out there who say, oh, but I want to be investing my time in, X, Y, or Z other tools. So why is email the best starting point for a digital communications effort in a church, or honestly, or anywhere, right? But we're talking specifically about churches. But why is it still central despite all of the other shiny bells and whistles out there, other ways to reach people? Why is it still central, do you think?
Well, I think if we think about it in our own lives, it becomes kind of obvious. To me, the email address, and in some cases your cell phone number, are kind of our digital key to accessing and unlocking almost everything important to us. So how do we access our bills online and pay our bills? How do we get access to our medical records or any kind of sensitive info online? Pay our taxes, all those kinds of things. How do we access virtually any social network that we are a part of? How do we talk to the most important, closest people in our lives? It's through it's somehow you're using your email address and sometimes cell phone number to access those things. And so email addresses just become central to all those things. It's a key to unlocking all those things. And there's 5 reasons I think that is the case and remains to be the case. And this is particularly for churches. So as churches look to implement technology, that this still applies to how churches operate and how they think about implementing different tools or building certain tools around their operations. So the first is that it's simple. So when you're dealing with churches, you have all kinds of leaders. You have volunteers, you've got paid staff, you've got some that are tech savvy, some that are not so tech savvy. You have complex organizations, you have very simple organizations. Even within your church, there's sort of simple ministries and there's more complex ones with more people and more help. But you need something that's kind of a backbone to all of that everybody can understand and everyone can use, and that will work in a variety of situations. So it's simple enough that it can work in any kind of situation. And that's what's the power of simplicity. And email is certainly that. All right. So that's the first one, is that it's simple. The second is that it's universal. So, and when you're trying to, both on the admin side, so people trying to use it, but also in the people you're trying to reach, a church community tends to be a very diverse group of people. So lots of different ages, lots of different levels of tech savviness, lots of different levels of media usage. But email is the most universal channel. So more of your people use email than any other tool. And so it's a good one if you want to have something that's, again, kind of a backbone of your communication that's going to reach the most people. The third one is that it's a stable technology. So it's been around for decades now, decades and decades. And it still basically operates exactly the same way it did when it started. And so it's something you can build on top of that is going to be the same in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, because it's stable. It's a stable technology. Whereas, if you built your communications around Facebook for your youth ministry program 5 years ago, the next year you realize that all the kids had moved to Instagram. And then the year after that, they moved to Snapchat. And the year after that, they're on TikTok or whatever it is now, right? So it's not a stable place to communicate. So you have to find channels that are stable. The same applies to all these other ministries. And so number 3 is that it's stable. Number 4 is that there's no middleman. There's no middleman to go through. There's no Mark Zuckerberg that tweaks his algorithm and says, aha, you can't reach your people as nicely as you could before. Now you have to pay me money to reach them. With an email address, you could take it and you can use any number of systems in the world to be able to send a message to that person's inbox. And number 5 is that there's nothing to download and no login in order to access it, because people are already logged in natively in whatever app or computer that they use all the time. They're in it all the time. So there's nothing extra they need to log into. You're not asking them to create a new account on some new site to be able to communicate with you, or nothing to download, no extra steps. And that's important when it comes to church communities, because you can get your most engaged people to jump through all kinds of hoops. They'll sign up for a new thing. They'll download the app. They'll do all that stuff. But a church community, again, is generally a diverse group, a whole spectrum of levels of engagement. You have super engaged people, sort of engaged people, not so engaged people. And so you want something that's going to reach all of them when you need to. And so you need something that there's no barriers to using for everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so for all those reasons and many others, email remains this central part of our electronic communications, no matter where you go. And we think of it at Flocknote as the new home address for your members. So at churches, it used to be you always wanted to get the physical mailing address, because if they stopped showing up, you hadn't heard from them for a couple of years, you know that you could send them something to that physical mailing address and probably get a hold of them. But now physical mailing addresses change more often than email addresses do and cell phone numbers do, because we need them for all of these things to operate in our lives. And so think of it as the home address for your members, that this is where you can reach them in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, probably, if for some reason that you don't hear from them, they stop showing up, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, that was going to be the sixth one I added. And if you didn't mention it, I was just thinking, like, aside from, I probably had 2 email addresses, not counting work email, in my whole life. One was the super embarrassing Hotmail address that I will not say what it was, that I created when I was 10, that I kept until I needed to be a reputable, citizen of America, and fill out scholarship applications. But I've had that same Gmail that I created when I was 18 ever since then. And I can't even think of changing it, because, like, it's just like you said, it's hooked into everything and my cell phone number is the same way. I still proudly keep my Montana area code for reasons other than convenience, because, got to represent the 406, even though I live in Washington. But again, that's the same thing, just to think of all the people who would need to have my new number. Whereas even, addresses, it's even a little bit easier, quite a bit easier, I would say, to change that. But I think that's good. So yeah, probably safe to say that email isn't dead, right?
Yeah. I wish I would have kept my old 979 College Station area code from college, but for some reason that was too long ago, before people didn't change their cell phone numbers anymore. But see, you probably also still have your old Hotmail, your embarrassing Hotmail address, forwarding to your Gmail address. Because a lot of times people can still reach you there, even though you don't use it anymore.
Yeah, true. I think I had it for a while. I want to say until a little while after college. But then by then it was just like all of the forwards that, all of my grandma's friends, got it and sent it to me from the time I was, 13 or 14 or whatever. So I think I did finally close it down. But yeah, I mean, that's still the case. We get that all the time. But yeah, so I mean, again,
we still love grandma's forwards.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So I mean, obviously email is still super essential, but there's this reality that, and we see it all the time at Flocknote. It's a little bit frustrating. I feel, frustrated on the part of, like, for churches sometimes, because they're often chasing lots of other avenues before they get a robust system for emailing and texting in place first. So I mean, whether it's an app or, trying to do stuff through a website or a database tool, not to say any of those are bad in themselves, of course, because they all have a place in an overall communication strategy. But why do you think people spend so much time chasing these novelties instead of going with what's tried and true?
Yeah. The next big thing, right? We always think there's the next big thing. So I think 2 reasons come to mind. One is that there's this built-in bias we have that new is better, especially when it comes to technology. So new is better. So we always assume that newer things are better than older things. And it's just not the case. In many parts of life, that's not the case. And this is another example of that. 2 is that we think they're shortcuts. We're hoping that they're shortcuts. So we see maybe you used to just put your announcements in the bulletin, and then people stopped kind of reading the bulletin. So then we said, okay, we're going to announce all of these things at the end of Mass on Sunday or whatever. So then they start announcing at the end, but then people start leaving early. And so they start announcing it in the middle then, trying to force people to listen to it. People are still tuning it out. So then we start sending all these other digital channels, all the information. They're not reading our emails. So we text them and tell them, hey, I just sent you an email. Go read your email. Then they won't give us their cell phone numbers anymore. And so we're chasing them on all these different social networks and tools. Because we just think that the switching tools is going to hopefully fix the problem. That newer is going to be better. And the truth is that if email doesn't work well for you, there's some exceptions to some niche demographics, right? Like email is not going to be a great way to reach a 14-year-old or a 16-year-old, right? But you can reach their parents with it really well. But most of your parishioners, most of your members, if it's not working well on email, doing these other channels is not going to all of a sudden start working well. It's probably going to be much worse because they tend to actually be less effective than email when it's working. And what we found is that organizations that are doing something meaningful, that have people who are bought into their mission and are engaged, email is magical. And so the thing is that we see those new things as hope it's going to fix the underlying problem. And of course it doesn't. So whenever we find ourselves chasing those things, we have to start asking those harder questions of maybe what I'm communicating, what I have to say. They're just not that into you, Matt. So, so you got to start asking your question about what you're saying. And so those are some other things we're going to be covering here on the Finding You Know show as we dig into this. And we actually decided that we're going to kick off this whole show with a series of shows talking about these things because we want to keep these shows nice and short, so they're easy to digest and listen to, get something that you can chew on and learn a little bit from, but we don't want to get too long. And so this is a big topic. We're going to have a series of shows here talking about email. How do you make your email more effective? How do you make it work for you? What are you doing wrong? We're going to cover all those kinds of things, open rates, subject lines, and we're going to kick it off next episode. Our second episode is going to be, we're going to cover the number one reason people open your email. Number one reason people open your email in the first place. We're going to start digging into all these things. We hope you'll come along with us and listen in.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it. I mean, on the one hand, you're thinking, gosh, it's email. How many shows could you do about it? But at the same time, you think about anything else that we do, that we devote time to. If this is your lifeline, which for churches, especially now, gosh, when we're recording this, we're still, mostly on lockdown. Who knows what it's going to be in a month or 2 months or 3 months. But digital communication is the way you're going to reach your people. And so, I mean, think of anything else you want to do really excellently. You have to dive in and be intentional. So that's what we want to do. So yeah, I'm super excited for this. So for the sake of time, that's it for this one. But we do want to, at the end of each of these episodes, take a question from listeners on findingyouknow.com. You can find the little button to send us in a question for later episodes. But we're going to bounce over now to our People Got Church Problems segment. Okay, so our question today is from Jeff. Jeff asks, I check the stats in Flocknote for our emails we send, and it consistently shows between 33 and 36% open rate. And it says that's a better than average response. He's talking about Uno giving him a little kudos, saying it's a good open rate. Is this true, that open rate? What is truly considered a good open rate and why?
Good question, Jeff. So we get this question a lot from church leaders who have maybe not tracked open rates in the past. So maybe you're used to just sending out emails through Outlook. You copy a bunch of email addresses into the BCC field and blast it out. Which is not a good practice if you're sending to lots of people. But you've been using some other tool that just is not that sophisticated and has not been showing you or tracking any kind of open rates. And so maybe you assumed everyone was reading my email, or at least most people were reading my email. But then when you start tracking it, it's kind of eye-opening to go, whoa, like Jeff said, 33, 36%, is that good? And the truth is that is actually pretty good. So the average open rate for a church community, it depends on purposes and industries and all those different things when you look up like what's a good open rate. For church communications, especially for larger lists, the average is low 30s%. And the bigger the group gets, the more it's going to tend toward that average. Regularly we see ministries get 40, 50, 60, 70, 80% even. If you have smaller groups that are really highly engaged. But 33, 36% is, first of all, a great open rate. So make sure you know that when you start tracking this, that you're doing pretty well. And then of course you can find ways, and we're going to help you, give you some ways to improve that through the show here. But another thing to think about, because you might say, well, that's still not that great. Well, let's put it in a different context. Like if we look at the open rates of other channels that you might use. So if you put a message in the bulletin and hope everybody gets it, what percentage of your people actually end up getting that message? And I've polled thousands of church leaders in live conferences in this question. And I always get a range of answers from 1 to 10% or so. So I put it around 5 on average. We'll call it 5%. So it's not very many people, which the bulletin, that's not the purpose of the bulletin. The bulletin's there as a reference when someone wants to go look something up. some of your more engaged people will regularly look at the announcements in it, but a lot of people are not going to. And so 5% is probably your open rate. You look at something like Facebook, the percentage of followers or fans that actually see one of your posts is averaging around 7%. I think it's actually worse now. It's like 5%. Yeah, like 5% now of your people that you've managed to get to like your page. So that's obviously a smaller subset of your community that you've gotten to go over and like your page. Now only 5% of those people actually get a given post, which again, that's not what Facebook's good at, is notifying people of these kind of communications or making announcements. It can work for that, but it's better at other things, engaging friends of friends, some of those kind of great things that social networks can do or can be used for, but not for basic communication, not your primary communications. A mobile app's another one that maybe some different churches have tried for different reasons, but still, even there, sending a push notification, you think, oh, that's really good. Lots of people get that. But the trouble with that is the people have to download the app first. So on average at churches we've looked at all this data on, it's somewhere like 7 to 15% maybe of your people are going to download the app. And those are your most engaged group of people. So again, even if 100% of those get a message, you're still looking at a 7 to 15% open rate. Now you look at email and you're going 33%, 36%. That's 7 times what the bulletin open rate is, 7 times what Facebook open rate is, and double or quadruple what a mobile app's open rate is. And you're going to also, that's percentages. And you pointed this out to me too, Matt, like whenever you look at this data, it's the percentage of people you have email addresses for is way bigger than the percentage of people who have liked your Facebook page, have downloaded your app. So when you look at those percentages, you're reaching way more people on something with even a 36% open rate on your email, in terms of its effectiveness. So keep that in mind. It's still probably, and the only thing that probably beats that is texting, right? So texting, you're looking at a 99% open rate, okay? And you got to get people's cell phone numbers first, but it obviously has to be used. It's a more disruptive form of communication, very effective, but has to be used on a more limited basis. So it's not your normal way of communicating for most groups of people. That's where email fills the role perfectly.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thanks, Jeff. Hope that answer suffices. But that's all the time we got for today. But before we go, we're going to throw it over to our friend Liz. At the end of every one of these episodes, we're going to find out where Uno is. So we're going to pass it over to Liz and talk to you all next time on the Finding Uno show. Where's Uno at today, Liz?
Thank you, Matt, and howdy, everyone. Our friends from the amazing parish sent us this photo of Father Brian Nelson from St. Mark Parish in Colwich, Kansas, and Father Dan Dooling from St. Joseph Oast and St. Rose of Lima Parish in Mount Hope, Kansas. These priests are rocking their flock socks and looking quite stylish, if I do say so myself. If you find Uno, snap a photo and send it to us at howdy@findinguno.com, and we may feature you. Also, you can submit a question to Matt Warner at any time using the question form on findinguno.com, and he may answer it in a future episode of the Finding Uno show. And before you go, we would absolutely love it if you could leave us a review and like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you leave a review, send us an email at howdy@findinguno.com, and we will send you a pair of our highly coveted flock socks, and then you can match Father Brian and Father Dan. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the Finding Uno show.